Greetings. I'm doing this video in black and white because I think there are times in Scripture where it's obvious something is true or it isn't true. And I apply that to the subject of water baptism. You're either saved by water baptism or you're not. One or the other. It's a black and white situation. And I go to the Scriptures to make my point. Paul said to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that I thank God that I baptize none of you. Now he did say that he did baptize Crispus and Gaius and the household of Stephanas. But he makes the statement, I thank God that I baptize none of you. That does not make sense if water baptism saves. That does not make sense. And you can talk all around the issue by saying that he did water baptize. But he did not water baptize in order for folk to be saved. And then, 3 or 4 verses down on verse 17, the Apostle Paul says, For Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel. That does not make sense if water baptism is the gospel of our salvation. And what is interesting is that Paul said, Christ sent me not to water baptize. The Lord sent him to preach the gospel. And water baptism is not part and parcel of the gospel. That's important to see here in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. You can talk all you want around it, but that's what the Scripture says. And it ought to help us deal with this subject of water baptism. Water baptism is an ordinance that proves the faithfulness of a believer to the Lord. It's done as unto the Lord. And one of the things that happens when people are water baptized in Scripture is the question is asked, if you have judged me to be faithful, then why not water baptize me? It's not water baptize me so that I can be saved too. Two different things. It's a black and white situation. And if you cut people off who understand Scripture, says it's not important to be water baptized in order to be saved, then you have to ignore what Paul wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and ignore the fact that the Lord sent him not to water baptize but to preach the gospel.